Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to this Introducing the Sporting Heritage Toolkit session. As you're probably aware, this session was meant to run during conference, but due to a few technical difficulties we were having, we were unable to run it. So I'm very pleased to be running it as a standalone session. For those of you who I've not met before, my name's Fran Stovald, and I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage. So I look after the conference and the webinar programme, the networks and the hangouts. And then alongside all of that, I've been working with my colleague Sonia, who's going to introduce herself in a moment, on this toolkit. I'll just do a quick bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Sonia to introduce herself. If we have any technical difficulties this morning, I'm hoping that we won't, but if for any reasons the tech goes down at your end, please just rejoin using the joining link, and I'll keep an eye on the waiting room and let you pop back in. If we have any technical difficulties at our end, which fingers crossed we won't, I will get in contact with people and let you know whether we can get up and running again within the allotted session time, or whether we need to reschedule, or we'll think of a plan B. Feel free, we're planning it to be a very chatty session this morning as we're going through things, and very relaxed. So that's the benefit of running it as a webinar as opposed to a conference session. So feel free to either raise your hands, put things in the chat, or we'll stop regularly and ask for questions. I think we're a relatively small enough group that we can chat amongst ourselves as we go on. So I think that's everything that I need to say. Sonia, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll get started?
Yes, yeah, as Fran said, I've been working with her on the Sporting Heritage Toolkit. And then previous to that, I did some work, which I know some of you through, doing that with the Understanding Audiences, which was looking at how sporting heritage and collections with sporting heritage elements to them collected data about their audiences. And then aside from that, I work as a freelancer, helping and supporting people put in funding applications, do evaluations, and do a bit of project management of things as well. So that's me.
I should say that Sonia and I work together a lot. So we're sort of two peas in a pod quite often. So introducing the toolkit, we should just crack on. There's a lot to get through this morning. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of background to the project. It's part of the Sporting Heritage Sport England project, which is a 3-year project, and we're almost at the end. We've got not quite a year still to run on it. And because it's funded by Sport England, it's been primarily aimed at the national governing bodies of sport. And what we were finding as an organisation, that we were having more and more national governing bodies of sport coming to Sporting Heritage as an organisation saying, we would like to care for our heritage, but we don't know where to start. If you imagine that heritage is not part of your day-to-day business and you don't know where to look, or you don't know anybody who's within the sector, it's where do you go for that advice and guidance? So we were finding that we were being asked quite similar questions on a regular basis. So it looked like there was a need for a resource to get people started across a whole range of subjects. And we knew from our membership that there were also smaller organisations with Sporting Heritage Network that would benefit from this sort of advice. The other things that you will be familiar with from the Sport England project is all the women and disability strands. So all of these have been wrapped up in our Sport England project. So that's a little bit of the background to where the need for this toolkit has come from. I thought maybe if I start to share my screen, and we'll just talk about different elements of the toolkit as we go through. By all means, shout out and ask questions, and Sonia and I will do our best to answer them as we go through. So we're going to start off looking at the structure and how you navigate the site. We're going to talk about some of the nuances and differentiation that we've tried to put into the site. We're going to do a walkthrough of a couple of the topics. There are 8 topics up at the moment, with more coming, and some of the topics are bigger than others. So I'm particularly going to give you quite a detailed walkthrough of the collections topic, which is probably the biggest topic on there. But we'll look at some of the others. So if there's particular topics you're keen on, do shout and we can look in more detail at those. We're going to look at some of the case studies and talking heads, and we have the star of one of our talking heads here with us this morning, Brian from England Netball. So, and then we'll talk about the topics that are still to come. And at every point, we're really keen that this toolkit works for you. and it contains the information in the format that would be useful to you. So if you see things that we've missed, or we've used terms that you don't understand, or you would call something different, do say, because we're not precious about any of it. The whole point is that it's a living document that needs to be, as widely understandable as possible. Right, I will share my screen and we will make a start. Can everybody see this?
Yep.
Right, so it sits on the main Sporting Heritage website. So you can access it at the moment off our homepage, but when it disappears off the homepage, I think it's going to sit in the advice section. And I'm pretty sure there's a link in there already for it. So all the way through, if any of you have had a chance to look at it beforehand, you'll see that it is already quite a massive toolkit, but in each of the sections, we've tried to keep it quite light touch, so that you're not having to wade through masses and masses of information at any one time. So I'll just explain a little bit about the structure. So we start off with a standalone welcome from Mike Diaper, who's from Sport England. So we've got sort of an introduction from our funder. And then we have how to use this toolkit section. So in this section, if I just go into it, it talks about how the toolkit's structured. Do you need to read it all? What sort of information is in there? If you're looking for things that aren't covered in there, if you come across a broken link, if you spotted an error, if you spotted a typo, or there's something you can't find, and how you search the toolkit. So I thought I'd go over some of this and actually sort of demonstrate some of it in more detail, particularly how the toolkit is structured. So I'll just go back to the main page and I'll demonstrate it using one of the sections. So the structure is the same going all the way through. So I'm going to pick governance as our first topic. So we have 8 topics, and each one is split into 3 levels. But before you get into each level, at the beginning of each topic, you get a topic overview page, which gives you a summary of what's in there. So you can see at a glance if there's the topic or the subject that you're looking for, or if you just want to sort of be able to browse it quickly. Each topic then has an introductory, what do we mean by section. So I do find that sometimes different terms can mean different things to different people. So to provide some context, what we've tried to do is give an explanation at the beginning of each section, so you can see what we mean and see if that matches your understanding of it and sort of where the gaps might be. So when we go into governance, we talk about the Charity Governance Code, who's responsible for it. This is using some of the resources from the Charities Commission. So as you can see on your screen, that's possibly one of our longer pages where it's sort of 2 screens worth of scroll down. A lot of the pages are much, much shorter, as I say, because there are lots of pages to look through. So we have a definition section at the beginning of each topic. Most topics, but not all, have a things to consider before you start section as well. So these are chunks of information that are applicable to all the levels that you might want to jump into, and are sort of good grounding. So in the governance section, we've talked about ethics and we've talked about organisational purpose. And we felt these were things that either you needed to be aware of or needed to have thought about before you jump into any of the greater detail. I say most topics, but not all of them have that things to consider before you start. Then you get into the levels. So you will always see the 3 levels as we've got here. Level 1, getting started, level 2, underway, and level 3, next steps. And they are exactly as they say on the tin. So the way that the toolkit is structured is if you feel that you are a complete beginner to any of the topics, you can jump in at level 1, work your way through all the level 1 topics, work your way through all the level 2, and work your way through all the way to level 3, and consider yourself quite knowledgeable at the end. But they're also designed that you can dip in and out. It may be you've got some knowledge across all 3 levels and you just need to fill in some gaps, so you can dip in and out. So when you go into each of the levels, again, there's a summary before you start. And how we've tried to couch this is say what this might look like for you. So this may be you for level 1 of governance. If you're looking to set up a new group to manage and safeguard your heritage, or you may be new to governance and want to understand the role that it plays in the success of an organisation, or you may want to review and refresh the governance within your organisation. And then it has some suggested activity that might help you meet your needs. And then this is where you get to the meat, apologies to vegetarians, meat of the toolkit. So you get the topics at the bottom. So you can go into each of these, and here we have the main information for that. So this is about choosing the right legal structure. And then all of these are links out to other websites. So here we've drawn from the National Council of Voluntary Organisations. So this is going to be a test. I'm not sure the screen share will continue to work if I do that. I won't click on it because I think it might break the screen share. And then the Resource Centre, the Charities Commission, and then all the other appropriate charity bodies across the home nations. And then you could come back up to level 1 and choose another topic to go into. So you might want to go in and look at, if you're in a position to set up a new museum, as I know some people occasionally are, we've pulled together the information there across all the home nations again. So using this top breadcrumb is one way of navigating. You can also navigate using the drop down here along the side. So everywhere you've got a plus, it will drop down and you just get a longer and longer little menu, and then you can click them and they'll jump up again. So you can flick through that way. Or if you're looking for a particular topic and you're not quite sure where to find it, you can click on the Toolkit Contents, which is essentially, I'll show you, it's a hyperlinked sitemap. So again, it gives you a list of what's under each topic. So here you can see we've got governance, followed by financial planning. So you can see the subjects that are in each of the levels as you go through. And this sort of sitemap structure becomes more useful as you get into topics where you have subjects that could sit in more than one place.
Yeah, I'll move.
Sorry, did somebody want to say something? Nope, okay, I'll carry on. So yeah, so if you're not sure where a topic sits, going through the hyperlinked sitemap is quite a useful place to start. So it's going to take us back to the main homepage. So I'll show you that it actually sits in our advice section. Here we are. So it's the top of our advice section at the moment. All right. I'm just going to stop the share just for a moment. So having gone through that structure, does that make sense to people? Is there anything else on the structure side that anybody would like to look at? I'm happy to go through another topic if it's easier. Thanks, Joanna. I'm just going to check and see if there's anything in the chat as well. I saw that there was a message that popped up.
Just from Tim.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Yeah, well, I think it's been needed for a while. So yeah, so and it's been a big thing to put together, and I'm hoping that it will continue to support you as you develop, you and Liz. So Sonia, shall I hand over to you, and do you want to talk about the differentiation? If I go back into the screen share, do you want to talk about the differentiation between the different elements?
Yeah, and then you can just go into the sections that we talking about.
I'll jump around for you.
Yeah. So for some sections, not all, we have got differentiation between nations. So obviously for everybody, for all the topics, there's not necessarily a difference between the nations, but where there is, we've highlighted that at the appropriate points. So one of the ones we were going to look at just to demonstrate this is the Disability Discrimination Act, or the Equality Act. So it
sorry, I've jumped into the Charity Commission stuff first. So we've got all the different charity commissions.
Sorry.
There. That's okay. No, I can
go by the list, Fran.
sorry. I know that we.
So I could talk about that. You can stay there. It's okay.
I'll be good, and I'll go into legal compliance and do the DDA stuff.
It's okay. It doesn't matter. So yeah. So as I was saying, for the Equalities Act, there are differences between Northern Ireland and England, Scotland and Wales. So for that instance, we've highlighted that the Equalities Act is in place for those three nations, but for Northern Ireland, the Disability Discrimination Act is still in force. So with this, we've just gone into the relevant details about providing you links to the Equalities Act, and then what your legal duties are under that Act. And then for Northern Ireland, it's the Disability Discrimination Act. And where possible, we've gone into the organisations that will support you in those particular nations as well. So as I say, it's not necessarily consistent across all the topics and different themes, because it's not necessarily different between those things, but when it is, we've tried to highlight it. So another example is governance, which I think Fran was trying to show us before.
I was just super keen, that's what it was.
You just really want to show people the differences with governance in the nations.
Well, since we've got Jo with us today.
I know. I feel like I have to be on my game for this one.
Yeah. Even I get lost in the toolkit sometimes.
But I think, as you were saying, Fran, it's if you do get lost at any point, you can go up to either the breadcrumbs at the top, can't you, or go to the sections, the drop down list at the end. So I mean, I get lost as well sometimes as well. So again, with if you're looking at whether setting up as a charity is the right move for you and the right way to go as an organisation, you will have different requirements if you're setting up in England and Wales to Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. So again, we've just linked to those resources that are specific to those regions, and that you can go and look at those and make sure that you're following the right guidance for your particular organisation and which nation you sit in as well, and that'd be which nation you're registered with as well, because I know some people will have national organisations, but where you're actually your head office or you're registered. So, and then the other one we were going to look at is learning, just to show the differences in those two. Well, the DDA was around the legal compliance, and obviously charities work is around your legal setup, whereas
I'm trying to think where we popped it.
We do it in safeguarding.
Yes, possibly.
Just trying to think if that's yes. So with the learning one, it's about the disclosure and barring checks. So it's it's checking, and it's where you get those done, or for information. So again, we've just highlighted that for Scotland, you've got you can go to Disclosure Scotland for them to help you with that. And I think the other nations for that, you go through the government. So might need to look at again, isn't it? That one. Anyway, so yeah.
And while we're here,
it's just highlighting where there's differentiation between the nations and where you then go for that information. So and
if I could just jump in quickly, sorry Sonia, where you'll see that as you work through the toolkit, it's very difficult to talk about topics in isolation. So there are links across the topics. So although we're in the learning section here, where you get these little boxes, these are sort of internal links. So there's additional information on safeguarding in the governance section. So if you want to check it both in the learning section and the governance section, you can jump across the toolkit. So there's sort of links laterally across in a number of places. Sorry, Sonia, back to you.
No, and I think that's particularly relevant with the legal information, isn't it? Things around like health and safety, like you say, DBS checking and things like that, because they do cut across different elements of what you do as an organisation. We've repeated some elements where it's, there seems to be a need to do that, but as Fran said, we've also linked across as well, so we're not doing too much repetition for people as well. So I hope that's something that people find useful, but it may be something that people want to feed back to us about, whether that's the best way of doing it and whether that's clear or not, because we did have a little bit of backwards and forwards between ourselves, didn't we, Fran, about that one, about how that would work. And how it works within the toolkit as well, because some of it's due to the technical way the it's set up, about what we can actually do within it as well. So there's some limitations about how we can actually provide information for people as well. And then the other side that we've differentiated between as well, which Fran touched on, is between archives and museums as well. So the first one we had was collections. This in your mega section, Fran.
My mega section. So there is actually a whole, although there are, I'll show you some of the pages where there is links to both museum and archive resources. And I think this came out of a discussion that we had at one of the Heritage Champion meetings, where people were saying, what is the difference between the two approaches? Which one should we take? Does it matter if we follow a little bit of museum advice and a little bit of archive advice, depending on what our collection is? We thought it would be useful just to talk about the different approaches. So there is a page within collections which talks broadly about the difference between the museum approach and the archive approach. And I would say the overriding key is it doesn't matter which one you choose particularly. Obviously, if you have a mainly paper-based collection, the archive approach may seem the obvious one to go for, but you can care for paper-based collections within the museum approach as well. The main key is just to be consistent. Whichever approach you choose, just be consistent with it. So there is a section there.
And I think it's worth, as you said, Fran, it's worth thinking about that right when you're setting up your organisation, isn't it, and make a decision then, because then it does make a difference when you're going through your setup and your governance about which approach you're taking. So it's the consistency, but also setting it up quite well at the beginning and making the decision early on, because I suspect Fran's come across this as well. We've come across organisations that haven't done that at the beginning, and then it does cause issues if people are chopping and changing between the two later on. So
yeah, so I'm just going to see if I can find you a good example of where we've got
the collection.
The different recording your collection might be a good. Actually, I'm pretty sure we've got something defining what you collect. Oh, no, not so clear that. Let me go back and try the other ones. There are lots of points within museum and archive practice where the practice is very similar. So if you come across a section where it's not defined between whether this is a museum approach or an archive approach, it's a sort of an overall approach. We've only made the definition between the two where they are very different.
Yeah.
So here, yes, so that we've got a museum approach about creating an inventory, and then one of our webinars, and then you've got the archive approach, which is a slightly different listing approach, supported by some resources from the National Archives. You'll get little yellow boxes throughout the toolkit, and these are downloadable templates that you can use, which either we've put together or people that we've worked with have put together. But you'll see mainly you'll get hyperlinks which will take you out to toolkits, templates, articles, videos, all sorts of things on third-party websites. So it's our job now to make sure that we keep all these links up and running and make sure that they're always updated. So that's the ones in collections. So just look at another couple as well, Sonia.
So it's probably more in collections than anything else, isn't there, would you say?
I think
in terms
so.
of the differences, can't say the word now.
We have one down in evaluation as well.
Yeah. I suppose the main difference is when you're looking at it, isn't it, to start with, is what accreditation you pick, isn't it? Whether you go for the archives accreditation or the museum's accreditation, and then that will set you off on your path.
Yes, if you're choosing to go down an accredited route, they're slightly
Yeah.
different structures, or whether you're using those as your guidance.
Yeah, and it's quite a good thing to use as a checklist anyway, isn't it? Accreditation, whether you're doing it or not. So there's
Yes.
information about accreditation in this toolkit as well. So
yeah, so in the collection section, if for anybody who's not familiar with the accreditation schemes, which are run by, well, they're overseen by Arts Council England, and supported, the archives one is supported by the National Archives. They're the quality marks for museum and archive practice. But you know, they're quite a big system to go through if you haven't already been through an accredited process. But they are definitely a worthwhile thing doing. But they're not, it's not appropriate to all organisations. Do you remember where it was in evaluation?
No.
This
This is good, isn't it? The person who set it up is like trying to think what it would be in evaluation. Just shows how much information there is in the
is it to do with measuring impacts? No.
I wonder if it's in level 1. You just do the drop down menu.
Just talks about inspiring learning for all. Anyway, you will find it as you go through that there is differentiation between the two. And as I say, if you don't see differentiation on a page, don't worry that you're missing anything. It just means that the approach from a museum point of view and from an archive point of view is broadly the same. So you can use the same approach across both, depending on which approach you're taking. Or as I say, we've only really broken it down where the supporting resources or the approach or the sort of underpinning thoughts behind it are different. I know we've got some comments in the chat, so if I stop the share again and we can just
so asking about search function.
Oh yes. No worries, Nick. I think I popped you on mute anyway. But yeah, not a problem at all. Yes, Brian, it is on the public domain. It's linked off the homepage at the moment, and when it's no longer our hot latest news, it will sit in our advice section. And yes, there is a search function. So when we go back into the screen share, I'll show you where it sits. It's not a search function per se, it's a sitemap. Because unfortunately the technical parameters of the toolkit, because it's so enormous, didn't allow us to do a basic search, unfortunately.
Can I just say, ladies, from my perspective, even I learned with governance and all the subjects that you've put on there, I just think, and I know Tim's already said it, but this is a phenomenal toolkit, because from my perspective, having worked in this sector and in charity sector, I've never been able to find one site that holds information about all the different areas, both the organisational stuff and the museum stroke archive specific. So for me, I'm just going to do that to YouTube because of the amount of effort and energy and time and resource you've put into this. Because I think Sporting Heritage are going to be like the flagship on this, because they're going to be the first that's done something like this. So very well done.
Yeah, just add to that, Joe, as well. I've recently just recommended to the South East Museum Development to because the Museum Development Service do something called an organisational health check, and I was doing some work for the South East Museums Development on updating their links and what they use as references, and I put the toolkit out as one of the key tools to use in terms of just information and support material that's out there. So they've got it, and they came back and said that they thought it was excellent as well.
Yeah, so I've had funders ask me for it as well. So Heritage Fund and Arts Council want to see it as well. So it's all down to the hard work that you two have put into this, and obviously thanks to Sport England, obviously. But no, it's been brilliant. It's really good.
Oh, that's really kind of you.
Definitely getting good feedback in terms of people using it already, and we had someone checking it as well for us as well, and she was she said that she found a lot of information and found a lot of things that she didn't know from doing the checking, doing the editing for us. So yeah,
well, it's definitely been an interesting process putting it together. And I suppose what we should say is it's in no way an exhaustive list of everything, because once you start looking across all the many resources that are out there across the heritage sector, from the charity sector, business advice, when you look at the differences, I say, between the museums and archives, and there's a little bit of libraries information in there, particularly once you start looking at all the absolute explosion of resources that have come out during lockdown, particularly around digital engagement. There's so much that we couldn't, it would have been a completely unmanageable resource if we pulled everything together. So we have cherry picked what we think are the most accessible and that demonstrate the best practice, and are good sort of tasters to get you started. And you'll find as you click into the resources and you go out to the third-party websites, and so whether you're going out to the National Archives or whether you're going out to the Archives and Records Association, or you're going out to the Collections Trust or one of the museum development networks, wherever we found a resource that we think is useful, invariably those resources then have, oh, if you're interested in this topic, here's some further reading. So you'll do what Sonia and I have been doing, which is disappearing down little rabbit holes.
I was going to say, yeah.
On that topic, but hopefully they'll be useful, because it will then extend your knowledge and take you to places that we haven't included, because you yourself can then follow that breadcrumb trail as is useful to you. What's been quite difficult for us, and this is where feedback from yourselves would be really useful, is knowing what you know and what you don't know, and it's really and which path you want to take. And that's been quite hard, because we've both worked in the sector for 20 plus years. So some of the things you forget what you don't know. When we, it's very easy for us to assume, oh, well, everybody will know about X, Y, and Z. But actually think, you've got to roll that back and go, okay, if I was starting from scratch, where would I go to find this information? Or, what would I recommend?
Yeah.
So there's
those gaps that people can see, that it's really useful to get feedback around that, isn't it? About and as you were saying, the new things that are coming out as well. There's such a lot that's come out, and COVID stopped some of it because things were happening before COVID, and then it's been they've been happening even during COVID, but have not necessarily been taken on as practice. So I think particularly around things like maybe Black Lives Matter, or especially around the EDI stuff, things like the neurodiversity and neurodivergent work. I mean, that was going on anyway, but it's really kind of then, come through COVID, and then it's now really, there's a lot of resources around about that as well. So yeah, it's just, if you think we've missed anything, please do highlight it to us. I saw that rabbit holes. I went down one yesterday, didn't I, with the volunteers. I thought I'd done volunteers and got a load of stuff, and then suddenly found a new website, and then I went off and found a few other bits that were useful. So
I find when new resources get published, there was the if you've not seen it, the National Archives published a fantastic resource halfway through the pandemic about managing mixed collections, which is there. I mean, it's a massive document in itself, and we do refer to it a lot in the toolkit. And it's about how you manage an archive collection alongside an object collection. And I think about 6 people contacted me and went, have you seen this? It'd be great for the toolkit. So as new things are coming out, people know that we're looking for good and best practice. So if you spot any gaps, errors, or would like to suggest any new content, we have our own dedicated email address. That's how important it all is. So I've just put it in the chat. It literally is very simple. It's toolkit@sportingheritage.org.uk, and that will come through to us, and we can add things in. So they are the sort of the nuts and bolts of the toolkit. We thought we'd spend the next section just doing a bit more of a detailed walkthrough of some of the topics. I feel that I've already shown people quite a lot of the governance. So Sonia, do you want to start with audiences? If I share the screen again. So here we are, audiences.
So as Fran was saying, we start off audiences the same as every other topic. With this one, with the things we think you should know beforehand, we've put in a section about GDPR and how does it affect me, because that's something that is particularly relevant to when you're collecting data and how you're collecting data. So sometimes within topics we've got something very specific that we think you should know about, and then sometimes that section is much more of a general kind of overview about what maybe you should be doing. So anyway, in audiences, this is particularly looking at GDPR and how it affects you and what you need to do. So in this instance, we've linked to share museums. East blog post about it, and then a success guide from the Association of Independent Museums. So let me go back into level 1. So again, we're getting started. We've done what this might look like for you, and just picked out some of those things in terms of just, you know, if you're just starting off looking at audiences and how you might look into those in a bit more detail, and then some suggested activity. What I should say is that suggested activity tends to correlate to the topics below as well. So what you'll see in those bullet points tends to sort of reflect which topics are here. Obviously with this one it's a little bit more detailed, but there is a correlation between those two as well. So in this one we've just gone through and looked at audience research with the basics. So to just, and this is an example of where we've differentiated between archives and museums, because you've got support coming from the National Archives, and they're again, once you go into that, this is a particular resource that we've picked out, but there's other stuff that the National Archives have as well, not just around audiences, but around other topics as well. And then we've looked at some good practice examples, toolkits that take you through those sort of basics of audience research and audience development. So do you want to go back into and then other sources of key data? Again, this is one that does differentiate, because there's research that's produced specifically for museum audiences, and then again for archives as well. So there's a comprehensive national survey, and they collect and analyse the data. And then we've looked at more general statistics, and then where you can go for things like your tourism statistics. So again, each of the nations has a specific support agency for that as well. So and then the impact of COVID. Again, where relevant, we've picked out some resources that are particularly relevant to COVID and the impact of the pandemic. Audience data and visitor trends was one of the key areas, I would say, that did produce a lot of data while COVID was going on, and people have generally reported a change in visitor behaviour as well. So there's some really useful work around here. Again, there's a huge amount out there, and we just picked out some of the key pieces that were going on, but you will get linked off into other information and sources of data for that. So also you can go access it through the toolbar at the side as well. For the level 2, we've looked at, I won't go into these, Fran, I'll just talk through. We've looked at maybe how you might write an evaluation plan, and then analysing and presenting your data. We've just tried to look at it in terms of things that a pathway through for you as an organisation, about what your first steps might be, and then what you might do after that. So again, as Fran was saying, you don't necessarily have to do it in the way we've said. You can dip in and out, but we've tried to highlight where possible a sort of best practice, sort of a stepped approach to it as well. So this is just going into a little bit more detail about what you might do next, and then how you might look at actually showing your data. And then level 3, next steps. This one is just again looking at some of those things that you maybe a little bit more challenging if you're a small organisation, but you're wanting to move to those next steps. Looking at working with focus groups, and then measuring impact as well. So again, I think level 3 sometimes is not necessarily as sort of structured in that way, and is bringing out things that you that really are things taking you to another level in terms of what you're doing as an organisation, and can often be quite challenging. So step 3 information might not be one of those things you want to dip into in the first instance in some of these things, but in other instances it would do so. And is there anything you want to add to any of that, Fran?
Excuse me. I think the only thing I would add is, and you'll see as you go through the different topics, is you'll find that there's a lot more weighting or a lot more sort of content in level 1 and level 2, and as you get to level 3, because they are the next steps and there's slightly more added value aspects of the topic, there's only 1 or 2 things in there. You'll find that the biggest meat is in level 1 and level 2. So just so when you start looking through, you'll just see that that's how they sort of balance out. You see that's fair to say, Sonia?
Yes, yeah, no, so I was just reading in chat, Joe's just gone. So message. Yes, yeah, and I think, yeah, that's what I was just trying to get at, is that sometimes, yeah, there's less information in level 3 because we have weighted it, as you say, quite early on, hasn't it?
Yeah. Right, well, shall I move on to collections? Has anybody got any questions about the evaluation section? Nope, I'll move on. So collections is probably the biggest section on here, and it's at the heart of what most of us do. That's not to say that you don't need to be looking at any of the other topics, but collections is quite often the thing that we get the most questions about. So I just thought I'd show you what's in the collections section and also how it links out to some of the other topics. And I have a few questions for you about where some of the information sits. So it's got a slightly different structure because it is such a big section than the other topics. So this is the homepage for collections. So we start with a quote from the Empowering Collections report about how important collections are. We go straight into that idea of the different approaches, whether you want to take a museum or archive approach. And the thing that I feel that is absolutely key when you're doing collections work, which is be consistent, but also the sort of the other side of that coin is be patient. As I'm sure any of you who work with collections know, it can be a bit of a life's work. So at this top level, we have our definition, the differences between the approaches, which we've looked at already. We'll come back and look at things to consider before we start. Accreditation schemes we've touched on already. Excuse me. So we put in some more detail in here. I'll just go and look at the page. I say accreditation isn't suitable for everybody. It's a huge amount of work, but can pay dividends because it's a quality mark for your collections. It can unlock particular funding streams for you. But as I say, we're very aware that it's not right for everybody. Hence, there are references to the accreditation scheme and to other collection management standards as you go through the collection section, but it is not the overriding theme, because we're very aware that actually you can be following best practice in managing and caring for your collections without being following the accreditation scheme. So I've got details of the museum version and then details of the archive version in there, so you can explore those further if you feel that's right for you. Going back up to the top level. So there are sort of 4 meaty sections within the collections section. We have collections at risk, digitising your collection, collections management, and collections care. And these last 2, collections management and collections care, are the bigger of the 4. So I just show you what's in collections at risk. And we felt it was important to put collections at risk at this top level, because if you do suddenly feel that your collection is at risk or you're concerned about the future, you don't want to be having to dive through many layers of the toolkit to find it. So we put it somewhere nice and easy. So there's the definitions of what a collection risk might be, what might cause a collection to be at risk, how you can assess. So we've used a museum resource here from Share Museum East about how you can assess risks in your collection. And then there's the risk awareness profiling tool, which is quite useful if you're, again, wanting to assess risk. A link to our webinar, which we ran very early on in the lockdown. I think it might have been the 2nd or 3rd webinar that we did as Sporting Heritage, which was myself and Justine with support from Philip Gale from the National Archives. And also, we were very keen to put this in that just so that you know, if you're ever in a position where your collection is at risk, that there is a lot of support out there. So there is a joint statement from 16 organisations covering almost the entire heritage sector that they will try their absolute hardest not to let a collection disappear. So that's the collections at risk section. A lot in it for just one page. You go into digitising your collection. So again, we just have one page. And I wanted to be very clear that there will be a separate section which is about digital skills. So if you're looking at doing podcasts, films, online exhibitions, that side of your digital skills, that will all sit in a separate section. This digitising your collection is looking at turning your physical material into digital files. And there will be, the digital skills section is one of the ones that is still to come. So as soon as that is up, there will be a link between the two. So it talks about why you might want to go down the digitisation route. I know particularly during the pandemic, creating more online content has been a real driver for people, and I think will continue to be so. But the sort of what we were trying to get across with this section is there's a lot to think about before you even begin your digitisation. We would always recommend that people spend a lot of time sort of thinking through why you want to do it, who you're trying to reach, what sort of formats are you going to digitise in, how are you going to use it in the end? You know, is it going to sit on a website? Is it going to sit on a server somewhere? Is it up in the cloud? Who are you wanting to share it with? And don't do it in isolation, work in partnership with people. So we've put in the digital pathways resource, which has masses and masses of information on there from Culture 24. There's quite an easy to digest step-by-step guide to digitisation, again from Share Museums East. They do produce really good resources. And then if you're looking for something that's a bit more detailed, this digital preservation handbook is a massive handbook in itself. It's all online, and that's, as you can see, endorsed by the National Archives, National Record of Scotland, and the Archives and Records Association. So again, there's a lot of content in there for just one page. So then the two bigger sections before we get on to our starring talking heads. So the first is collections management. So this is where you'll see the structure of the other topics sort of start to replicate. So this is sort of a topic within a topic, if you understand what I mean. So collections management, you start again with a topic overview, the definition, things to consider before you start. So this is thinking mainly around your capacity, what resources you have, what time, what money, what space. Do you have volunteers? Do you have staff? And there's just a little assessment template that you can download there to help you sort of think through some of those things before you start or review your collection management process. And then we have the 3 levels. Again, it starts with what this might look like for you. So this is, you either have very little or no documentation about your collections, or you have paperwork, but you'd like to create some order to it. Or you have some paperwork, but you're not collecting it consistently. How do you go about doing that? So you're sort of at that very sort of starting point. So the main activity in here, and this is a good example of where you can see that there's quite a lot in at level 1. So we've got 5 topics there in at level 1, and you'll see as we go through, the topic numbers will drop. So that we've got talking about recording your collection. So that's looking at creating a basic inventory, and I'm pretty sure that links out to one of our webinars. Yeah, making the most of your collections. And again, there's downloadable inventory templates that you can use to support your work. And here you can link out to, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Spectrum guidelines. They're the nationally and I think internationally recognised collection management guidelines for the heritage sector. But they are very much guidelines. Not everybody can meet everything within Spectrum. depending on what capacity and resources you have. But I thought it was good to show you what best practice looked like. Defining what you collect talks about how you write a collecting policy. And again, I think this is one of those sections that's differentiated between museums and archives because they are slightly different. Yeah, so the archives have a slightly different approach with their data protection. You can make this quite a long and complicated document as you work your way up the levels, but what we've tried to do, particularly for level 1, is show that you could just create quite a simple document that just covers, it's one side of A4 almost that covers those questions. Then there's resources about how you accept items into your collection, how you move items. It's best practice within both museums and archives if you move a collection item from where it's stored or where it's displayed to somewhere else, that you keep a track of it. And if items leave your collection, so either if you're returning something to a donor or it's going out for research purpose or you're loaning it to somewhere, all the paperwork and resources you need are in this section. The 4th section looks at labelling and marking your collections. And then the 5th section looks at photographing them. So there's photography one. So here we've got a link back to that digitising your collection topic, which is further up in the collections. So it's just some very straightforward advice on how best to photograph and digitise your collections. Only in the last 6 weeks did I come across an organisation. I'm not working with them directly, but I'm sort of working alongside them. And I think they've scanned tens of thousands of photographs, but they've scanned them at quite a low resolution. So already we know that they won't survive probably the next 5-10 years because the resolution of the files, they've saved them as JPEGs. And when you're digitising, we would always recommend you would save as a TIFF because it's the highest resolution that you can save at currently. So we're trying to work with them. This is outside of sporting heritage, about how they can actually start to future-proof the work that they've done. And it's because when they started the project, they hadn't thought it through in all its different ways, and it's been quite hard to be diplomatic to their collections officer who's done all the scanning. And so she has scanned tens of thousands of items without having to say, well, actually, you've limited the life of your resources by not thinking it through right from the start. So I'm hoping that our advice will prevent that sort of situation happening. So that's all the level 1 material. So if we go into level 2. So again, it starts with what this might look like for you and then suggested activity. So in level 1, we had creating lists and inventories of your collection. At level 2, you have the option that you may want to develop this into a catalogue. Now, a catalogue record is different from an inventory record, and this section will explain how you can do that both for museums and archives approach. Excuse me. At level 1, we talk about writing a collecting policy. So you're defining what you as an organisation are collecting. At level 2, there's the option if you want to develop that into a collection development policy, which is sort of the next step up. So again, it's, as Sonia was saying in her section, it's how we can sort of layer this work in a sensible way for you. Looking at loaning material in or out. So at level 1, we talked about sort of the paperwork and documentation you might need to keep if you want to bring things in or out of your collection. Here we look at loaning in and out in more detail. And then the final one in this at this level is looking at collection specific software. So you may start at level 1 using an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database, both of which are perfectly acceptable for keeping your collection information on. But you may get to a point where you want to look at collection management software, which is a little bit all singing, all dancing. And there's masses and masses on the market for a range of different budgets. So we look at some of the pros and cons in there. And then we'll just look at level 3, and then that'll be the last one for collection management. So this I knew I'd find something that disproved my rule. When I said there was less at collections level 3 than there was at level 1 and 2, and here at level 3, I found this must be one of the few instances where there's actually more. So level 3 builds on the level 1 and level 2 activity. So again, we start off what this might look like for you. So at level 3, you will, we're sort of proposing that you know what's in your collection, you know where your gaps are, you may be aware that there are things in your collection that maybe don't fit as well as they could. So we're suggesting you might want to do a collection review, which is just making sure that everything in your collection fits within your collection policy, and you can identify gaps and proactively sort of fill them. Linked to the collection review, if there are items that you identify that no longer are appropriate for your collection, you may want to look at disposing of items from your collection. Particularly if you're an accredited museum, there is a very specific process that you need to go through, because once you have items in your collection and you are sort of responsible for them, you need to dispose of them in an equally responsible way. But disposal doesn't necessarily mean destroying, although it can do if it's badly infested with something like woodworm. It can mean passing to another organisation, museum or archive, or it could mean you're moving something from your main collection into a handling collection. So there are lots of different ways of doing it, and this section goes into it in more detail. We have a section on contemporary collecting. So I know that the classic example of contemporary collecting over the last 18 months is people who've been collecting COVID. So whether you've seen organisations who've been collecting memories or signs or photographs. Sonia and I set up a digital archive for another organisation that we've been working with about collecting local photography that's linked to the COVID pandemic and the use of the South Downs. There's been a lot, obviously, about using green spaces during the pandemic, but contemporary collecting can reflect all of that and more. I know that there's been a lot of contemporary collecting around the Black Lives Matters campaigns and just, you know, new things that are happening either for your organisation, for your sport, for your area. It covers all of those things. It's very easy for organisations to only collect what's deemed in inverted commas to be sort of historical, but actually, and then overlook what's being produced today. So sometimes we need to just have that little nudge to actually remember to collect what is being produced today. The top level on the policy and plan type work for collection management is bringing together a framework which brings together the plans and policies that we've looked at level 1 and level 2 and how you bring it all together. And any collection management framework would read across to things like your business plan and any forward planning you're doing. And then the final thing at level 3 is looking at rights management. So it's looking at whether you own the rights to reproduce the material within your collection, and whether you're doing this on social media, on your website, or for commercial reasons. So that's the collection management section. So you can see there's quite a lot in there, but hopefully you can see that it sort of steps through. The other big one, which only went live last night, is collections care. So again, starts with the topic overview and the definition. I'll have a quick look at things to consider before you start. So yes, so here we talk about object handling. And I always really like, when you're talking about collections care, I always really like the idea that actually what we're trying to do with our collections is quite artificial, because nothing that we collect was ever designed to last forever. And here we are all desperately trying to preserve it and stop it from crumbling into dust. And obviously good collections care can help you do that. And at the heart of good collections care is not handling your collections unless it's absolutely necessary. So there's information on handling collections there that sort of runs, sort of the golden thread that runs through your collection care activity. And then one of the main documents that we use in this collections care section is a document called Benchmarks in Collections Care. Some of you may be familiar with it. And I put the links into it here. And it's a self-assessment checklist that, again, has got 3 levels to it. And it's a way of just assessing how you're doing with your collections care, and sort of then gives you the next step to work towards. So there's information about the benchmark scheme there. Then, as per the other sections, we've got the 3 levels. So getting started. So again, you start with what this might look like for you, some suggested activity, and then at each of the levels, because we have 3 levels within the toolkit, and the benchmarks and collections care self-assessment has 3 levels, we're suggesting at level 1 that you would work through the basic level and then work towards some of the required standards. And some of that will be covered in the topics that we look at in the toolkit. This is probably the largest one in this level. So this is looking at all the main risks to your collection. So we go through the 10 agents of deterioration, and then the resources that can support them. So we've got temperature and relative humidity, light, pollutants, infestation, which if you don't already have it, there is the fantastic pests poster, never to be put up in your where people eat food, because it's incredibly off-putting. What happens if you have water ingress? What happens if you have a fire? Physical force, theft or vandalism, and then custodial neglect. And then here, actually, this is a reference to that fantastic National Archives resource that I was talking about earlier, the Managing Mixed Collections, because they have a whole section which supports this as well. And then if you're unsure whether you've got risks to your collection, there is a Great Share Museums East document, or if you're worried that you've got something that's more than these risks, so mainly something toxic, the Museum of London and their Museum Development Network have this fantastic e-tool which looks at things like if you suspect you've got arsenic, asbestos, explosives, lead, mercury. There's about 13 things they cover in there. So there's masses and masses of information in that section under the risks. Then there's information about how to pack and move your collections. So if you're unsure how to pack your collections, or whether you've just been using standard cardboard boxes or plastic boxes, it will make recommendations of sort of the next step up that you could do to make sure things are slightly more conservation based, depending on your capacity and your resources, and also how best to set up or review your store area. Excuse me. I'll just go into that and have a quick look at that one. So yes, it just goes through sort of the top tips and what to consider. I mean, it's very unlikely, almost in every museum I've worked with, it's very rare that you have a purpose-built store. So you're always having to work with what you've got. And it's very rare that you have an ideal situation. So by just working through some of these top tips, you can improve the condition of your store. And again, there's museum-specific information and archive-specific information. But if you are in a fantastic position to be building one from scratch, there's also the recommendation for the British standard for building planning in there. So a lot in level 1 for collections care. Oh, where are we going? Jump into collections 2. So again, at this level, we'd recommend that you would work through the second level, which is called Good, in the benchmarks and collections care self-assessment. This section is quite large as well. So if you think at level 1, we've talked mainly about the risks for different collections. So if you try and mitigate against all your risks, you will put quite a lot of collection care resources in place, but then you may want to follow up and actually add to that with collections care activity that's specific to the type of collections that you hold. So here we go through all the different types, or the main types of material that you might hold, with some resources to care for them. I have started with a word of caution though, because a lot of this information and advice provides details about how to do basic conservation grade cleaning. And if you're not familiar with it, we would always advise you take some advice before starting. So there, we would always advise that obviously Sporting Heritage can put you in touch with people. If you're linked in with your local museum development network, They often have conservators within their teams. Obviously, we're a subject specialist network. The National Archives can provide help and support, as can a county archive. And actually, the National Archives do produce a document about where to go for further advice. But if you've undertaken a little bit of conservation cleaning before, this Museum Development East Midlands video is very useful, just as a refresher for introduction to cleaning collections and talking about which are the most appropriate materials for cleaning things. And more importantly, what not to use. So then we go through the different types of collections. We've got archives, books, ceramic and glass, leather, skin and fur, metals including precious metals, paintings, frames and works on paper, photographs, textiles, and again, a reference to the National Archives managing its collections because they have further support in their document. And there's a little bit of specific, the information in that one tends to be slightly more organic collection material. I know that's not entirely true with the metal, but this section looks at specifically about film and audio collections and the different sort of care requirements they have. And then we've got the first bit of sort of policy writing. So again, if you've thought through some of the things at level 1 and some of the level things at level 2, we would always recommend that you pull it together in a policy so that you've got it recorded somewhere that you can share with other people in your team, and that you've got it recorded sort of for consistency purposes. Right, I'll just jump into level 3, and I know that there are questions in the chat and we will come back to those. So, perfect example of where there's less at level 3 than there is at level 1 and level 2. So at the moment in level 3 of collections care, it talks about bringing everything together in a collections care and conservation plan. So you can work through all the things in level 1 and level 2, and there will always be things that you won't necessarily have the time, the capacity or the resources to be able to achieve. And that's the sort of thing you can put together in a care and collections care and conservation plan. You can record what you're able to do, what you aspire to do, and then you can always write an action plan at the end about how you would like to achieve it. And again, it's these sorts of policies and plans that can link across to things like your business plan and the sort of financial planning that you need to do if you need to demonstrate it to your organisation. We would also recommend that you would do the top level, which is called best in the benchmarks. I'll just have a look at what's in the chat.
It's okay,
Right.
Fran, I've been answering it as
Okay, that's right. I could just see the number of comments ticking up, but if you're on it, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, no, I've been doing it while we've been going, so keeping an eye on.
Teamwork, that's what we like. So back to the top level of collections, and I remembered that we didn't go into this one, which is things to consider before you start. So this is at the top level of collections. So the things that we thought were important for you to think about before starting collections work, or the things that underpin your collections work, are the codes of ethics. So there are ethics, slightly separate codes of ethics for museums and for archives, and also a reference to the professional standards. So for within museums, it's Spectrum. For the archive sector, they use the International Standard of Archival Description, of which there is a summary of it, because actually to purchase the standard, it's a massive document and a couple of £100 to purchase, whereas all the Spectrum stuff is free and online with the Collections Trust. But there is a useful summary of it that this consultancy firm have put together for that purpose. So they're the underpinning collection one. Sorry, that's slightly a little bit out of order. Now, since we have Brian with us, shall I jump right straight in and do a talking head, Sonia? Should we do that?
Yes, yeah, I think that'd be good.
Brian,
I was just going to say that because
we're
we're in the right section, aren't we, for it as well?
Yeah, Brian, I hope you don't mind just using as an example. So as you can see, the toolkit is drawn together with masses and masses of information. And there are films in there along the way, but we thought it was quite important to actually bring the toolkit to life with people from within our network who have worked across these topics. And when we were thinking about collections, I knew that England Netball had been through a massive project, Heritage Fund funded, I believe, to catalogue their archive, and then they've lodged it at Heritage Quay in Huddersfield. So I thought this would make two sides of a good talking head coin. So we have a talking head here from Brian talking about how they went through the process, and then a second talking head from Dave Smith, who's one of the archivists at Heritage Quay, talking about where their sporting collections, because the Netball archive is one of a couple of sporting collections they have at Heritage Quay. So where the sporting collections sit within the wider archive, but also more importantly, how the archivists can work with and support groups to lodge their collections with an archive if you wish to go down that route, and how actually they would really welcome an ongoing relationship. And I know, I believe that's what England Netball have, is an ongoing relationship with Heritage Quay, because the depositors have all the subject-specific knowledge and the archive have all the archive-specific knowledge. So actually it works really well as a partnership. So I'm going to just click on your talking head, Brian, and we'll just play a few minutes of it if you don't mind. Can you hear the sound?
No.
I'll need to reshare it because I've just realised that I need to share the sound. Let me just see if I can. I think I can do it from here. Yeah, share sound. Okay. Sorry, Brian, take two.
Experience in doing just that in England's netball. I'll cover why we created the archive, what is in it, how we did it, and with whom, and where it is kept. I'll also summarise some key points from this experience, which I hope you will find useful towards the end. So let's get started. You'll notice I'm talking about an archive, but the process for a museum, I suspect, is very similar, but with the added complication of having to put our artefacts on display, which we rarely do. Two things drove our setting up of the England Netball archive. First, we had to move from our headquarters in Hitchin, Hertfordshire. And we chose to move to the newly built sports park at Loughborough University. However, this location didn't have the space for all the stuff that we had collected over the years, housed in cabinets, filing cabinets, desk drawers, files, folders, and even photographs on walls. These photographs will give you some idea of our collection, and so you can see that a new location was required. Not only that, the material that we had was not filed in any coherent manner and was completely unstructured. There was no contents list. And so it was pot luck if you could find what you were looking for. I suspect this is typical for so many collections. Second, we had our 90th anniversary of the formation of the All England Netball Association back in 1926. A formative era for many sporting governing bodies, now called England Netball. Somebody had the bright idea of combining these two together and applying for a grant from the Heritage National Lottery Fund to preserve heritage as part of these 90th celebrations. We were successful, and this enabled us to have an additional dedicated member of staff, aren't we lucky, who was also a trained archivist to sort out the mess. As well as we created a dedicated history website with a company called Community Websites, www.ournetballhistory.org.uk, which gives some of our collection the public space and links into the catalogue, but more of this later.
I'll stop there. So you can see, it's really lovely to hear it from somebody who's been through the process. So Brian, thank you very much for being one of our talking heads. I hope it was an enjoyable process for you. And you'll find that there are talking heads peppered throughout the toolkit. So I'm just going to think about where we've got some others. And there are more being added all the time. So in the Access one, we have one from Vicky Hope Walker from the National Paralympic Heritage Trust, who's talking mainly about physical accessibility and all the work that they've done there, and how it's a process of never thinking you've ever finished, that there's always something new to be done or new needs to be met. You must never sit back on your laurels, I think is the gist of her talking head. And then Karen Laurence Gamble, who's from Creative Ink Agency. So any of you who came to our introduction to web accessibility will know, will have met Karen and her son, Callum. And they particularly look at web and online accessibility. So again, you've got two halves of the same coin here, really. Vicky mainly talking about physical accessibility, and then Karen talking about online accessibility. I'm just trying to think where I've popped a couple of others. I think if you have a look through, you'll come across some more as well. Oh yes, we have Laura in audiences. I'm just thinking where I know exactly where people are. So here we are. So we've got Laura Crossley who's the head of content at the National Football Museum. She's also a very experienced consultant in her own right, and is particularly experienced in audience research and development. So she talks about how important that is, both for them at the Football Museum, but also across the wider heritage sector. So we've tried to bring, to life some of the written information that's in the toolkit with our talking heads. There are also, and there's only one in at the moment, but again, there are more that will pop up between now and Christmas. Here we are, case study. So we have case studies mainly drawn from the network. So I'm sure you're familiar with Jess Hartshorn, who's been doing the Hidden Histories Illustrated project over the last year. So Jess has written a lovely piece talking about how that project came to life, what was done, how it was delivered, and what impact the project had, and also sort of some top tips about how to work with an illustrator should you wish to go down that route as well. There's a link to her website, but I will also put on, for any of you who saw it at conference, Jessica did a really great session with Fiona Glinsky from the National Paralympic Heritage Trust about how they've worked together on a number of projects. And also Fiona talked about some other projects where they've worked with creative practitioners as well. So I'll put that link in because they talk about a range of different resources that they've collected. So that would make a good addition to here as well. So it's a constantly growing thing, this toolkit. I'm just going to stop the share for a moment. We've got about 10 minutes left. As I say, it's a growing resource, the toolkit. We would really, really welcome people's feedback on it. I appreciate there's masses to go through. I'm not asking, I'm not setting you homework by any means. But if any of you are ever in a position where you spot something, please let us know. There are more topics that are coming soon, which Sonia and I are busy writing at the moment. So the next topics to go up will be staffing and volunteering. We will have a section on the digital skills, which I mentioned already. So that will be the podcasts, films, creating online exhibitions, that sort of thing. There'll be a separate section about exhibitions and interpretation. Then there will also be one on marketing. And I think they're the final. Oh, and yes, and there's an absolutely enormous section still to come, which is the community engagement section. So that will be a little bit like the collections section, and we'll bring together a lot of those strands that Sporting Heritage has been working on. So we'll be looking at the different communities, community engagement in its broadest sense. So we'll look at women and disability and LGBTQ and people of colour, but it would also look at how you work with a community group down the road, and how do you get people into your organisation where you think you've got similar aims and plans, but how do you actually broker that relationship? But it's quite a large section, and we're still trying to wrangle it into a manageable format. I think Sonia's, it's been tearing your hair out a little bit, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So we're hoping that the majority of all that new content and the remaining talking heads and a few more case studies will all be up by Christmas, if not sort of early January time. And then so you'll have about a dozen, trying to do my maths now, I think you'll actually have 13 topics when it's all done and dusted. But if there's something we think we should add, do shout. And we will add things in. And I suppose with 10 minutes to go, I suppose I'd like to throw it out to those in the room to see, comments, questions. I have one question for you, but I'll wait and see. Roger, what do you want to say?
very glad that you mentioned staffing and volunteering as a topic to come. I think what you've got here is an absolutely magnificent achievement as a manual and an inspiration, but it does rest on people being organised in the first place. For the Great Save, we kind of represent people who are not yet necessarily organised. So if we're talking about people who are looking at the heritage of individual football clubs, very often we're talking about, and I know we have Richard and Tim and Liz on the call, a relatively small number of people for whom this, cornucopia of advice, experience, and so on might be, somewhat overwhelming, but that's not necessarily your problem. But what I'd love to see in the staffing and volunteer section is an idea of how many people you need to band together, with what kind of skills they should come, and what sort of role should heritage professionals play in setting up a new organisation to represent an individual sports club's heritage. Should they come in a personal capacity with their professional expertise, or should they come as a partner to your new organisation with the responsibilities and obligations of their parent heritage organisation? Sorry, that's not a particularly direct question, I know, but if you touch on some of those issues either now or in that module on the toolkit, I think the less organised amongst the audience will be very grateful.
Brilliant. No, I completely, yes, I think you're absolutely right. There's so much on there. And I know that I did a little sort of show of the toolkit, a walkthrough, a couple of months ago, possibly even longer, again with the Heritage Champions, because they're all the national governing bodies of sport, just to show them. And a very similar comment came back from Patrick from Paradance UK, where he was saying, well, we would love to do all this, but we have no volunteers and we don't know where to start. So it's not that we're not willing, and it's not that we're not enthusiastic, it's capacity, and then how do you keep that going so that you don't lose your momentum halfway along. And I think what you're talking about there, about sort of the role of some professional input or size of teams, we can definitely provide advice on, because without wanting to fudge an answer, there are lots of ways to skin a cat. So it's maybe if we could put forward a couple of suggested ways of approaching it, you can maybe pick out what's appropriate for the Great Save. I know that Sporting Heritage are very keen to secure some funding, and I know that Justine and Joe have been looking at it about all around volunteering, and the Arts Council are just releasing funds on volunteering. So I know that's something that we are keen to look at, and how we can build up volunteering across our network. So there may be something that we can feed into that further down the line. Tim, you were going to say.
Oh, just to add one real benefit this is going to give Liz and myself, we recognise that there are huge gaps in what we can do, in our capabilities, in our knowledge, because we're football fans rather than professional museologists and archivists. But we have the great privilege of partnering with people who do have those backgrounds. And in particular, I work with Suffolk Archives, which is already fantastic and only going to grow. And what this toolkit really helps us to do is to understand what we might expect of them, and also to understand the language that they talk.
Hadn't thought of that as an unexpected benefit. Brilliant. Yes. Well, yes. It's sort of touching on that point that I mentioned earlier. It's sort of the knowing what you don't know, isn't it? And knowing how to pitch things. And yes, I think that's very true around expectations. And I should say, please don't be daunted and overwhelmed. We don't, this is not going to become like an entry-level test for anybody who wants to belong to Sporting Heritage.
Yeah, it's like a citizenship test, isn't it?
I know. It's slowly going to be woven in.
I just wonder, picking up on your point, Tim, do you think it would be useful to sort of have a glossary of terminology somewhere?
I probably wouldn't need that, but there may be others that would benefit from it.
Yeah.
Nick, were you nodding your head? Nick P as opposed to Nick J.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Brilliant.
Yeah, I
Brian,
just
you-
wondered because yeah, it depends where you're coming in, and if you like you were saying, Tim, if you're coming in at an early stage, I just think sometimes we just talk about things that even just say museum or archive or whatever, even if it's just a quick. And I know there's other documents that do that as well. So we can pull things. Anyway, sorry. Yeah,
I kind of mean that it enables this kind of toolkit will enable us to have the kind of conversation that means, first of all, we sound more like we know what we're talking about. Always a bonus, but more that we'll be able to get more out of the relationship because we understand their work in their language and actually all the things that would be all the expectations we might have, perhaps.
Yeah, it just made me think when you said about that, maybe we did need a glossary because not everybody would, even reading that stuff, would then understand and maybe just take people across. But yeah, no, it's really.
That may well be the case, but I think you guys have educated us quite well over the years so far.
I feel our work here is done, Tim. It really is.
Yeah, we can
Sorry, Brian, you were going
Brian,
to say.
Yeah, just to reply to Roger, if he finds it, he might find it helpful. The archive that we started for England Netball also didn't have any pretensions on archivists until we actually got one on board from a grant. So we were lucky in that sense. But the volunteers came from our Honorary Life members group, because it's interesting that us oldies have more interest in history than a lot of the youngsters. And so it might be just worth trying to finger or tap on the shoulder some of your oldies who have a passion for the game or the club or whatever, and just say, how would you like to think about doing an archive? And again, we were lucky in that we did get a relationship going some years downstream, by the way, with Heritage Key, and they have proved very beneficial in understanding the terminology that Tim's talking about. I mean, half my life was spent, half the times I visited Heritage Key was tapping the knowledge and the communications, the vocabulary is what I think I'm struggling for, of Heritage Key people, because they have a different language to us grassroots people. So I don't know if that's helpful, but certainly us oldies seem to be more interested in heritage and history than perhaps some of the younger people.
I think that's true of almost all volunteer organisations at the moment, sadly.
And I think that relationship you have with Heritage Key, Brian, is testament to it. You found the right fit, and I think that does take a little bit of work in itself, brokering those partnerships and finding people who really value what you've got and want to work with you and support you. And
yeah, you're right. And I think what's essential, when you have to remember that we might be experts in netball, but if we want to have an archive, we have to talk to experts in archiving and respect them for their knowledge and experience in that sense. And we certainly got off on one or two cross wires on occasions. And so the temperament of the people who talk, with whom you make a relationship, have to be consistent, if you like. And certainly we found the people at Heritage Key really nice people who wanted to help us and we wanted to help them. It was a two-way relationship. And if you talk to Dave Smith, who's also one of the heritage champions there after me on that video thingy, I'm sure, I haven't listened to that, but I'm sure he'll be saying the same thing. It has to be a two-way process.
Yes, definitely. I'm very conscious of the time, so I had one quick question to ask everybody. My next page that I'm writing is all about oral history. And I wondered, this is occasionally, this is where Sonia and I have lots of backwards and forwards about where things would sit. Of all the topics that you've seen, where would you put oral history? Would you put it in collections? Would you put it in learning? Do you think it should sit in the community section when that's up and running? Where would you expect to see it if you went to the toolkit?
Collections.
Collections, yeah, people agree? So if I put it in collections, okay, lovely. Well, that's nice and easy. I think you might have just been outvoted, Joanna. It might end up in collections. But if you're looking for
We can put a link across anyway.
Yes, we'll link it. Yeah, we will link across so that there are links across them. So I say we're just on time. So any final comments or questions? Sonia, anything else you'd like to say?
No, sorry, I was just yes, I was just quickly going to say, and this picks up on something Joanna just said in the chat as well, but we're looking at different audiences that may volunteer. So as well, so she was just saying about young people, and it's definitely, we've got some guidance around that. And looking at people with different abilities as well. So how you could engage, you know, people, you know, perhaps with learning disabilities and things as well. And then, you know, just looking across your community and who might be able to volunteer as well, just moving away or giving different ideas about people you can actually, you know, work with and volunteer and involunteer in different ways as well. And remote volunteering is one of the key things that's sort of emerged quite strongly at the moment as well. So anyway, just to say that's one of the things that I'm like looking at, and it was one of the rabbit holes I went down yesterday.
Yeah. There's always more to be explored. Well, so thank you so much for your time. Oh, Brian, did you want to jump in with one last thing, or was that a clap? That's a clap. Oh, jolly good. Thank you. That's really kind. So thank you very much for your time today. As you can see, it's a big resource, and I hope you enjoy using it. But as I say, we're not precious about it in any way, shape or form. We would really welcome feedback for anything that you think that could be improved or changed, or if you know of something new to be added. As the new sections go up and go live, they will be announced in the Sporting Heritage newsletter. Or if you're looking for something that's not there, just drop us a line. So thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. See everybody soon. Thank you.